You're going to see this theme in medicine across the board. Anytime something's complicated, we try to break it up into smaller pieces so that we can better understand it, or at least we can assign characteristics to it. The nervous system remains the most complex aspect of the human being, and quite frankly, the aspect we know the least about. We know what brains do, but we don't really know how they do it. So nervous system, we divide, there's multiple ways to divide the nervous system. Okay, central and peripheral is one that's very common. Central is a brain and spinal cord, peripheral is everything else. All right? The autonomic nervous system is a portion of the peripheral nervous system. It sits next to the somatic nervous system, which is controlling your muscles and also bringing in sensory information into the body. So, like what we think of as our conscious awareness of the world is coming through somatic. When we are talking about homeostasis and the control of involuntary stuff, that's autonomic. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Within autonomic, then, we divide autonomic into two big wedges, anatomically and functionally. It's the same arrangement. Sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight system, stimulatory, right? The parasympathetic nervous system is rest and digest, inhibitory, or rest and repair kind of thing. So this is one way of organizing. Another way is afferent versus efferent. Afferent is coming into the body, efferent is coming out, right? So an effect is an efferent outcome, right? Because an effect is something that you made happen, it came out. I would add under autonomic nervous system, we also have the enteric nervous system, which is a portion of this too. We're not even going to touch on that until we get to the digestive tract. But short version is the gut has a brain of its own. The digestive tract has so many interacting nerves that it essentially is autonomous from the brain. And we'll talk more about that when we get to those sections. All right, so if we look sort of anatomically at the peripheral nervous system and how it connects to the central nervous system, we see this pattern. The somatic nervous system, like I mentioned earlier, we have upper motor neurons in the cortex, lower motor neurons in the spinal cord or in the ganglia for the cranial nerves. And then those lower motor neurons then innervate skeletal muscle, like we talked about earlier this morning, right? So you'll see that we have a synapse, one synapse between brain and muscle, one synapse. Now, in the autonomic side of things, we're going to add a synapse, right? We still have not an upper motor neuron, but we call it a visceral motor neuron for the autonomic system. And we have one synapse at the spinal cord, another synapse at a ganglia, and then the final synapse at the target organ. So we've gained a synapse, right? So instead of having one synapse between brain and target, we have two synapses between brain and target. Okay, so that raises the question, what is a ganglia? A ganglia is a collection of nerve cell bodies that are found outside the central nervous system. That's the definition of a ganglia. In the autonomic nervous system, the way I think of ganglia is they're like teeny tiny simple little brains, right? They can make very simple neural connections and neural determinations without having to go all the way to the brain and back. All right, now the benefit of that is it means that, so let's say we have a vessel and it's experiencing high pressure. Well, instead of having to reach all the way up to the brain for a decision to make that vessel larger, instead it only has to go to the ganglia, and then the ganglia can make that decision. All right, so the ganglia is like a small, simple peripheral brain. So the autonomic nervous system pathways, if you start at the ganglia, okay, it means we have a pre-ganglionic neuron, and we have a ganglionic or a post-ganglionic neuron. Those are synonyms, all right? So post-ganglionic and ganglionic mean the same thing, okay? So the pre-ganglionic neuron, its cell body is in the spinal cord, and its synapse is in the ganglia. The ganglionic neurons, its cell body is in the ganglia, and its axon and synapse are on the target organ then. So we have a pre-ganglionic and a post-ganglionic fiber, and those are gonna vary. So that's somatic versus autonomic. Now we're also gonna look side by side at sympathetic versus parasympathetic, and we're gonna see how the pre-ganglionic and post-ganglionic fibers differ between those two sections. All right, so autonomic nervous system, the big picture. 3 divisions: sympathetic, parasympathetic, enteric, right? Coordinates cardiovascular, respiratory, digestive, urinary, and reproductive functions. Basically, all of the body systems, the autonomic nervous system is going to play a role in coordinating. The ANS carries information and responds to water, electrolyte, nutrient, and gas changes. We'll talk about all of those in this course, each of those kinds of receptors and each of those kinds of responses. The autonomic nervous system has receptors. They're not the same kind of receptors the somatic system has, but the autonomic system detects changes in the vessels, in the organs, in the body, and then responds to those changes relatively automatically. The ANS is involuntary. We don't have a natural connection to the autonomic nervous system. I say natural connection because there are documented individuals who have learned to control aspects of their autonomic system. You can read about them online, like people who can consciously lower their blood pressure. Now, that you can learn to do that kind of thing, but that it's not a natural occurrence, right? You have to really work at that. Generally, it's involuntary. These 2 divisions are in opposition. Sympathetic and parasympathetic, both divisions innervate many organs, all right? They're both on most of the time. So what we see at any given time is the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So like when we talk about sympathetic activation, we're raising the balance. The sympathetic is going up, the parasympathetic is staying the same. So we're drifting towards the sympathetic side, right? Whereas when we stimulate the parasympathetic, it goes the other way. So typically they work opposite each other. The parasympathetic and sympathetic, one, for example, parasympathetic slows the heart rate down, sympathetic speeds it up. So at any given time, your heart rate is the balance between those 2 forces. Both are on all the time, okay? So, and we'll see sort of how that balancing act comes along. This is one of my favorite talks, autonomic is, because the autonomic nervous system, of all the pieces of the body, we muck about with the autonomic nervous system more than anything else as providers, right? Every blood pressure medicine works on the autonomic nervous system. Many of our respiratory medicines work on the autonomic nervous system. Many of the medicines we use to treat patient symptoms like congestion, runny nose, cough, work on this system.